Have you ever felt someone love you and hurt you at the same time? Have you ever looked at a person and thought, I know there is something real here, so why does it feel like I am being pushed away? Because that kind of pain is different. It is not the pain of rejection. It is not the pain of losing someone completely. It is the pain of almost having them, the pain of feeling their heart, but never being able to fully reach it. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you will understand something that most people never do: why the people who feel the deepest emotions often become the hardest to read, and why understanding this can protect your heart, your peace, and your self-worth. There is a kind of emotional confusion that breaks people slowly, not all at once, not in one dramatic moment, but piece by piece, one message at a time, one cold silence after one warm conversation, one moment of closeness, followed by distance you never saw coming. And this is what makes it so dangerous, because when someone is openly cruel, your mind knows what to do. When someone clearly leaves, your heart eventually learns how to grieve. But when someone gives you just enough to stay hopeful, just enough to keep you emotionally invested, just enough to make you believe there is something real beneath the surface, that is where the mind gets trapped. And once the mind gets trapped, it starts doing what the human brain always does when clarity is missing. It fills in the blanks. It searches for meaning. It starts building stories to explain behavior that makes no emotional sense. Maybe they are scared. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe they care more than they can show. Maybe if I just become more patient, more understanding, more loving, they will finally feel safe enough to stay. And this is where people begin to lose themselves without realizing it. Because now the relationship is no longer just about connection. It becomes a psychological puzzle, a mystery your heart feels desperate to solve. That is what makes avoidant behavior so powerful. It pulls you into emotional uncertainty, and uncertainty is addictive. Human psychology has shown this again and again. The mind becomes more attached to what feels inconsistent than to what feels stable. Why? Because your brain starts chasing emotional resolution. You do not just want the person anymore, you want the answer. You want to understand why someone can hold your hand one day and emotionally disappear the next. Why they can look at you with warmth, then act like they need space from the very thing they clearly feel. Why they can make you feel chosen in one moment and invisible in the next. And the hardest part is this: most of the time they are not doing it in an obvious way. That is why this kind of experience confuses people so deeply. They may not insult you. They may not betray you in a loud, dramatic way. They may even seem kind, thoughtful, and emotionally present in small moments. But then they vanish into themselves. They become hard to reach, hard to read, hard to trust. And suddenly, you are no longer enjoying the connection. You are studying it, watching every word, reading every pause, measuring every shift in tone. Your nervous system becomes alert, your emotions become restless. And now love no longer feels like peace. It feels like emotional survival. This is where many good people begin to break inside, not because they are weak, but because they care. Because they are sincere, because when they feel something real, they do not know how to treat it like a game. They show up with their heart open. They try to communicate, they try to understand, they try to be patient. But when that energy meets someone who keeps moving closer and farther, something painful happens. The person who once felt secure begins to question themselves. They start asking, am I too much? Did I move too fast? Did I say something wrong? Am I the reason they changed? And this is the tragedy, because now the focus shifts away from the real problem. Instead of asking, why does this pattern keep happening? You start asking, what is wrong with me? That is how emotional confusion destroys self-worth, not in one big explosion, but in silent, repeated moments of self-doubt. And once self-doubt enters the heart, people start abandoning themselves to keep a connection alive. They become less honest about what hurts them, less clear about what they need, less willing to speak the truth because they are afraid honesty will make the other person disappear. But here is what you need to understand deeply. When someone has avoidant patterns, the problem is not always that they do not feel. Sometimes the problem is exactly the opposite. Sometimes they feel so much that closeness becomes overwhelming. Sometimes intimacy does not feel safe to them even when it is real. Sometimes being loved touches wounds they have spent years trying not to feel. And when that happens, they do not move toward love. They move away from it, not because it means nothing, but because it means too much. That is why this dynamic hurts so deeply, because it does not feel empty. It feels unfinished. It feels like standing at the edge of something beautiful that never fully arrives. It feels like emotional hunger, and emotional hunger can make people tolerate what they would normally never accept. Because when the heart is attached to possibility, it starts surviving on potential instead of reality. You stop asking, what are they giving me consistently? And start asking, what could this become if they just heal, open up, or finally let me in? And that question has trapped millions of people in relationships that slowly drained their spirit. You have to be careful with love that only appears in fragments, because fragments are powerful. A deep conversation, a soft look, a rare vulnerable moment, a small act that makes you believe, see, this is who they really are. And maybe it is. Maybe beneath all the fear, there really is love there. But love that only appears in flashes can still leave you emotionally starving. Because your heart cannot build safety from rare moments. It needs consistency. It needs emotional steadiness. It needs truth you do not have to decode every day. And maybe that is what brought you here. Maybe you are tired of decoding. Maybe you are tired of trying to understand someone who makes you feel close, but never fully secure. Maybe part of you already knows something is wrong, but your heart keeps holding on because the connection feels too intense to ignore. If that is you, then hear this clearly. Your confusion is not weakness. Your pain is not imaginary. And your longing for clarity does not make you needy. It makes you human. Because at the end of the day, the deepest pain is not loving someone who does not care. The deepest pain is loving someone who might care, but cannot love in a way that lets your heart rest. And when you finally understand that, everything begins to change. And once you understand that truth, a deeper question begins to rise inside you. What is actually happening inside a person like this? Because if you only judge the surface, you will miss the war that is happening underneath. You will think they are cold when they are actually terrified. You will think they do not care when, in many cases, they care so deeply that it threatens the identity they built to survive. And that is the part most people never see. Avoidant people are often not running from you. They are running from what closeness awakens inside them. Many of them learned very early in life that emotional dependence is dangerous. Not in words, not in some clear lesson someone sat them down and explained, but through experience, through disappointment, through neglect, through being misunderstood when they were vulnerable, through needing comfort and not receiving it, through learning again and again that opening up does not always lead to safety. So the mind adapts, the nervous system adapts, the heart adapts, and over time they become people who look strong, calm, independent, and hard to shake. But underneath that image is often a silent rule they live by. Do not need too much, do not feel too much, and never let anyone get close enough to truly affect you. This is why they often look emotionally controlled from the outside. They can seem mature, composed, even wise. They know how to function. They know how to keep moving. They know how to protect their space. But emotional control is not always emotional health. Sometimes it is emotional armor. Sometimes what looks like peace is actually distance. Sometimes what looks like strength is just self-protection dressed up as independence. And the problem is, this pattern can work for a long time. It can help them avoid pain. It can help them avoid rejection. It can help them avoid the terrifying uncertainty that comes with needing another human being. But the same strategy that protects them from hurt also blocks them from the kind of intimacy their soul secretly wants. That is why things often shift when real connection enters their life. At first, they may feel drawn in. They may enjoy the bond. They may feel comforted by your presence, inspired by your energy, even healed by your warmth. But then something changes. The more emotionally real it becomes, the more their internal alarms begin to activate. Not because you did something wrong, but because the closeness starts touching parts of them they have kept buried for years. And when buried pain starts to move, the body reacts before the mind can explain it. They may suddenly feel pressure, heaviness, irritation, confusion, or a need to escape. They may not even know why. They just know they no longer feel comfortable. And because they do not always understand the source of that discomfort, they often attach it to the relationship itself. This is one of the most painful psychological realities to accept. Sometimes, when an avoidant person begins to feel deeply, they do not interpret it as love, they interpret it as danger. That is how powerful old emotional conditioning can be. Their system does not say, "This is beautiful, move closer." It says, "This is intense, regain control." So they start creating distance. They become busy. They grow harder to access. They need more time alone. They become less expressive. And from your side, it feels like a sudden emotional collapse. But from their side, it can feel like survival. That is why logic often fails in these situations. You are responding from the heart. They are responding from defense. And this is where people get trapped in a very painful misunderstanding. They assume that if they can just love harder, explain better, or become more patient, they can calm the fear in the other person. But fear that was built over years cannot be erased by your goodness alone. You can be honest, you can be kind, you can be emotionally available, and still, someone who is not ready to face their own patterns may continue to withdraw from the very thing they say they want. This is not because your love is weak, it is because unresolved fear is stronger than desire when a person has not done the inner work. There is another truth that many people do not want to admit. Avoidant people often become most activated not when the relationship is bad, but when it is becoming real. They can handle casual attention. They can handle surface-level affection. They can handle the early stage where everything still feels light and controllable. But when trust starts deepening, when emotional reliance begins to grow, when they realize your presence matters to them more than they expected, that is when the pressure begins. Because now there is something to lose. Now there is someone who can truly hurt them. Now there is a mirror in front of them, reflecting wounds they thought they had already escaped. And that is why their behavior can feel so contradictory. They may move toward you, then retreat. They may show interest, then suddenly become distant. They may create intimacy, then seem uncomfortable with the very closeness they helped build. This is not random. It is the nervous system trying to stay in control while the heart is being pulled into unfamiliar territory. They want connection, but they also want protection. They want closeness, but they fear dependence. They want to be understood, but they are terrified of being fully seen. And living with those opposite desires creates emotional tension inside them almost every day. The sad part is, many avoidant people do not even realize how much damage this creates. Because if you have lived your whole life shutting down when things get intense, that pattern starts to feel normal. You tell yourself you just need space. You convince yourself you are better alone. You label emotional intensity as too much, because that is easier than admitting it scares you. And over time, you become someone who leaves meaningful things unfinished, not because they were not valuable, but because staying would require a level of vulnerability you were never taught how to hold. This is why so many good connections fail before they ever get the chance to become something stable. Not because there was no bond, not because there was no potential, but because one person is trying to build closeness, while the other is trying to survive it. And when those two energies meet, love becomes exhausting. One person reaches, the other pulls back. One person seeks clarity, the other avoids pressure. One person wants emotional honesty, the other wants relief from emotional intensity. And unless this pattern is understood, it creates a cycle that can break even the strongest heart. But the most important thing to understand is this: their struggle may explain their behavior, but it does not erase the impact of it. Pain still hurts, even when you understand where it comes from. Confusion still drains the spirit, even when there is a psychological reason behind it. And if you are not careful, you can become so focused on understanding their wounds that you stop protecting your own. That is why awareness matters. Not so you can excuse everything, but so you can finally stop taking every emotional shift personally. Because once you see what is really happening, you stop chasing every silence like it is a reflection of your worth. You stop begging for emotional consistency from someone who is still at war with intimacy itself. And most importantly, you begin to realize that what looks like mixed signals on the outside is often a silent battle on the inside. A battle between desire and fear, between longing and defense, between wanting love and not knowing how to remain present when it finally arrives. And when you finally understand that battle, something else becomes painfully clear. Love from an avoidant person rarely arrives in the way most people expect it to. It does not always come wrapped in reassurance. It does not always sound warm, expressive, or easy to trust. In many cases, it shows up in ways so subtle that if you are only looking for obvious signs, you will miss it completely. And that is exactly why so many people stay confused for so long. They are waiting for love to speak one language, while the other person is expressing it through behavior that looks distant, quiet, and emotionally unfinished. An avoidant person may not run toward you with dramatic words. They may not shower you with constant emotional intensity. They may not openly reveal everything in their heart. But when their feelings are real, they often start doing small things that carry more meaning than they know how to explain. They remember details you thought they ignored. They bring up something you said weeks ago. They notice changes in your mood, even if they do not ask about them directly. They may act detached on the surface, but they are often paying far more attention than they let you see. This is one of the strange truths about people who fear closeness. They can care deeply while still looking emotionally unavailable. Sometimes their affection appears through presence more than expression. They keep coming back. They circle around the connection instead of fully leaving it. Even after moments of silence, they return in some small way. A message, a question, a random check-in, a tiny effort that seems insignificant to anyone else, but to them, it took internal energy to do. Why? Because when someone fears emotional exposure, even a small act of reconnection can feel like risk. So while another person might express love with clarity and consistency, an avoidant person may express it through hesitant movement, careful contact, and moments of quiet return. This is where many people get emotionally trapped, because these small signs can feel deeply meaningful. And to be fair, sometimes they are. Sometimes those little gestures do come from a real place. Sometimes they are trying in the only way they currently know how. But the danger begins when you start using these scattered moments to excuse a painful pattern. When one thoughtful message makes you ignore 10 cold silences. When one emotional confession makes you overlook weeks of distance. When one soft moment becomes enough to keep you waiting through a long season of uncertainty. That is when your hope becomes stronger than your boundaries. You have to understand something important here. People do not only attach to love, they attach to relief. And when someone has been emotionally hard to reach, even the smallest sign of closeness can feel powerful. It creates a rush, a release, a feeling that maybe finally things are changing. Your brain lights up because after so much confusion, you have been given a little bit of emotional certainty, and that small dose can keep people invested far longer than they should be. This is why intermittent affection is so psychologically intense. It keeps the heart waiting for the next good moment, even when the overall experience is leaving you drained. And yet, from their side, the story often feels completely different. They may genuinely believe they are showing care. They may think, I am here, aren't I? They may not realize how inconsistent their energy feels because, in their mind, simply staying connected at all already feels like effort. That is the hard part. Their version of emotional giving may be shaped by a much lower threshold than yours. What feels like the bare minimum to you may feel like major vulnerability to them. And this difference in emotional capacity creates one of the deepest relationship misunderstandings of all. One person feels starved. The other feels overwhelmed. One person is asking for normal closeness. The other feels like they are being asked for too much. This is why their love often looks like contradiction. They may protect you in practical ways, but struggle to comfort you emotionally. They may want your presence but resist labels, commitment, or deep emotional talks. They may feel jealous when they think of losing you, yet still hold back when it comes time to truly let you in. They may create moments of tenderness and then suddenly become harder to reach after those very moments. To someone on the receiving end, this can feel almost impossible to understand. How can someone care and still create so much distance? How can someone want you and still hold part of themselves so far away? The answer is painful but simple, because desire and emotional readiness are not the same thing. A person can feel drawn to you and still not be capable of building the kind of safety your heart needs. They can miss you, think about you, even love you in their own internal way, and still fail to show up in a manner that creates trust. This is why so many people stay stuck in emotional confusion. They mistake hidden feeling for healthy love. They see evidence of attachment and assume it means stability is coming. But feeling something and sustaining something are two very different abilities. And maybe that is what makes this dynamic so heartbreaking. The signs are never fully absent. There is just enough there to keep you emotionally involved, just enough to make you believe there is something worth fighting for, just enough to keep your heart saying, if I give this a little more time, maybe they will finally open. But time alone does not heal fear. Love alone does not erase patterns, and someone's hidden emotion does not automatically become the kind of consistent care that a healthy bond requires. This is where many strong people lose years of their emotional life, not because they are foolish, but because they are loyal, because they can feel what is underneath the surface, because they are not shallow enough to walk away the moment something gets hard. And while that depth is beautiful, it can also become dangerous if it is not guided by truth. Because there is a difference between understanding someone's pain and building your life around their inability to love you well. There is a difference between compassion and self-abandonment. You can recognize their hidden care without making excuses for every wound it causes. You can see the humanity in their fear without making their fear your responsibility to fix. You can admit that their actions may come from something deeper without pretending that depth automatically makes the connection healthy. This is emotional maturity, not becoming cold, not becoming bitter, but learning to separate potential from reality, learning to stop feeding your soul on crumbs, just because they carry traces of feeling. And this is where your power begins to return. The moment you stop asking only, what do they feel, and start asking, what are they actually building with me, everything changes. Because love is not proven only by hidden emotion. It is proven by repeated effort, by emotional courage, by the willingness to stay present when things become real. And if someone can only love you in glimpses, your heart will always be forced to survive on uncertainty. That is why the real question is no longer whether they feel something. In many cases, they probably do. The deeper question is whether what they are capable of giving can truly hold the weight of the bond you are trying to build. And if the answer to that question is unclear, then eventually, no matter how much meaning lives underneath the surface, you will still be left standing in the same painful place, trying to make sense of love that never fully lands. And that is the moment where everything becomes personal. Because after all the analysis, all the emotional decoding, all the late-night questions and silent hope, one truth remains in front of you. What is this doing to you? Not to them, to you. Because there comes a point where understanding another person's inner struggle stops being wisdom and starts becoming a distraction from your own pain. There comes a point where empathy can quietly turn into self-betrayal. And if you are not careful, you can spend so much time trying to explain someone else's distance that you forget to protect your own heart from what that distance is costing you. This is the part many people avoid facing because it hurts more than confusion. Confusion still leaves room for fantasy. Confusion still allows hope to survive. But truth asks harder questions. Truth asks why you are still trying to earn what should be given freely. Truth asks why you keep shrinking your needs to fit inside someone else's limitations. Truth asks why your peace has become dependent on a person who cannot offer emotional steadiness without disappearing into themselves. And once those questions begin, you can no longer hide behind chemistry, intensity, or potential. You have to face reality. And reality is not always cruel. Sometimes it is simply clear. Sometimes the lesson is not that they are bad, it is that they are unavailable in the exact way your soul cannot keep surviving. Sometimes the lesson is not that they never cared, it is that care alone is not enough to build a safe bond. That is one of the hardest truths for people with big hearts to accept, because they know what it means to love deeply. They know what it means to stay. They know what it means to work through discomfort instead of running from it. So they naturally assume that if something feels meaningful enough, it should be worth fighting for. But not every meaningful connection is meant to become your home. Some people enter your life not to stay forever, but to reveal where you still abandon yourself in the name of love. They reveal how much inconsistency you have normalized. They reveal how quickly you start overgiving when affection becomes uncertain. They reveal how easily you begin performing for connection instead of simply receiving it. And painful as that is, it can also become the beginning of your growth. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you stop calling emotional chaos passion. You stop calling anxiety love. You stop calling your constant overthinking proof that this connection is deep. And that changes everything. There is a kind of strength the world does not talk about enough. Not the strength of holding on, the strength of seeing clearly. The strength of saying, I understand your wounds, but I will not let them become my lifestyle. The strength of admitting, I can feel your heart, but I can also feel the damage this is doing to mine. The strength of no longer confusing emotional intensity with emotional safety. That kind of strength is quiet. It does not need to prove itself. It does not chase. It does not beg for crumbs and call them love. It simply honors what is true.